Bosnia particularly, but also looking at... Lord Ashdown, when you were in Bosnia, you put in a lot of time and effort into tackling areas such as corruption, unifying or standardizing structures, and clarifying messages. What are the experiences and the lessons that you learnt there that you feel are most appropriate to the Balkans today?
You see, I think that in the Balkans we're not any longer dealing with peace stabilization. That era is over. The first 10 years, the years of Dayton, I suppose, were about stabilizing the peace. And by the way, we did that extraordinarily successfully. I mean, we did all the right things. We had enough troops, 60,000. We managed to overwhelmingly dominate the security space. We prevented the country returning to war. It's an amazing achievement if you consider what the war that Bosnia went through with, half the population driven from their homes, 250,000 perhaps killed. We created the circumstances in which NATO created the circumstances in which 1 million refugees returned home, the first time ever after war that refugees have been able to repossess their houses. So that stage was highly successful. I came in at the end of the era of Dayton, the era of stabilization, and the beginning of the era of Brussels. And the European Union is not just a union of ideas, it's also a union of values, it's a union of structures. It's a union which creates the institutions of a modern state. That not only was not done and had not been tackled, but actually Dayton, which had been an immense help in the stabilization phase, became an impediment because it locked into concrete the structures of a fractured country. I mean, 10 prime ministers, 10 ministers of the interior, and so on. So my task was to begin to create a functional, if highly decentralized state. And what does that mean? It means having the institutions, a taxation institution, VAT in our case, brought it in faster than any other country, let alone with the fractious nature of Bosnia. The institutions of proper courts, proper judges, proper body of law, the institution of a clean political space. That was my task. I began it, and we succeeded in some areas. We combined 3 intelligence services into one under the control of Parliament. We combined the 2 armies into one under the control of the state. We combined the taxation systems into a single VAT system. We created a Bosnia with a single judicial structure covering the whole country. But there are many areas still to be completed, and I have to say that the progress afterwards, the progress in the last, let's say, 2 years, has been one, I think, of regression rather than progress.
In your book, you describe the opportunities presented by a golden hour after a major victory. Do you think that Kosovo, with its declaration of independence and its new constitution, is in a golden hour now?
Not in the same way, no. I mean, the golden hour that I describe is the golden hour at the start of the peace stabilization phase. As you move down the track and start to build political institutions, that moment has passed. The golden hour is your troops have occupied, as in the case of Kosovo. You are now in charge, whether you like it or not. What do you have to do? You must not lose that golden hour to do the first thing that needs to be done, which is to establish security. The success of NATO in Bosnia and the success of NATO in Kosovo was, I think, pretty conclusively, not without some fault, but pretty conclusively, to establish the security envelope and to begin to build the institutions that would establish the rule of law. The failure of Iraq was the failure to establish that security envelope in the early hours, the early days, the early weeks and months after the war had been won. So I don't think Kosovo's well past that. It's now going through the rather more difficult and very long and tortuous process of trying to build the institutions of a state.
What, in your opinion, is more important in the Balkans? Transparent democracy or sustainable stability?
I don't think we're in the stability phase. I think that's over. I mean, no one in the Balkans is talking about returning to war. If there's a threat to the security situation in the Balkans today, it doesn't lie from either the possibility of aggression, one side and the other, Serbs versus Croats versus Muslims or Bosniaks. That is gone, and no one's talking about that. It's almost inconceivable that that could return. If there's a threat to security, it actually comes from endemic crime and corruption at the highest levels. It's a rule of law issue rather than a stability issue. So I think we're well past that point. Could the Balkans return to war? Well, you never say never, but it's inconceivable in the near time. Could the Balkans simply fail to continue to make progress and descend into a black hole let's remember now, inside Europe, a black hole of criminality and ungovernability. Now that is a real threat. And I have to say, looking at Bosnia, certainly, Serbia, absolutely certainly, it seems to me, Bosnia probably, Serbia absolutely certainly, it seems to me that in terms of being a black hole of ungovernability, recent years and months have marked a deterioration rather than an improvement.
Do you think that the balkanization of the Balkans has stopped with Kosovo, or do you think that other regions may be tempted to break away?
Well, I'm confident that we should resist the process. I think I'm confident it's over. I mean, the truth is that, and it's a tough way to put it, but the last price that Serbia had to pay for the follies and brutality of Milosevic was Kosovo. Could you see a further balkanization of the Balkans? I don't think you could. The one thing I think that would bring the Balkans back to war would be, for instance, if you would hand Republika Srpska over to Serbia. What are you going to do with the Muslim majorities that have now come back into Srebrenica, that Golgotha, which now has Muslims living back in it? Kozarac, which was the place where the old death camps were, has now got a Muslim majority, elects Muslim councillors. What are you going to do with Brčko, which is inconveniently, perhaps for some who'd like to see this done, perched, and by the way, the most effective operating multi-ethnic institution in Bosnia is Brčko, and it's in between Republika Srpska and Croatia. So it is impossible to do, and I'm very certain that we should be wrong to do it. It is the one thing I think that could bring the Balkans back to war. So I'm very clear that we should absolutely resist any further process of balkanization. Kosovo was the exception. It was the price that had to be paid for the follies of Milosevic. But I think the Serbs should realize, Belgrade should realize, that it is the last price that we have to pay for the stupidities of that.